What would you do if your brother's killers offered you $500,000 to stay silent about his murder? I never thought I would be the kind of person to take on a university, let alone one as prestigious as Whitmore College, but sometimes life forces your hand in ways you never expect. My name is Zara Mendoza, and this is the story of how my little brother's death became the catalyst for exposing one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern university history. It started on Halloween night 2023, though I wouldn't learn the full truth until months later. I was 26 at the time, halfway through my master's program in social work at Whitmore, living in a cramped graduate student apartment about 10 minutes from campus. Diego had just turned 18 in September, a bright-eyed freshman who'd gotten into Whitmore on a partial academic scholarship. Our parents, Maria and Carlos, had worked double shifts at the textile factory for years to make up the difference in tuition costs. The night everything changed, I was supposed to be watching over Diego. That's what our mother had said when she hugged me goodbye at the airport back in August, her voice thick with the accent she never quite lost despite 30 years in America. "Mija, you take care of your brother, you promise me. He's so young, so trusting. You make sure he doesn't get into trouble." I had promised, of course. What else could I do? Diego was my baby brother, 7 years younger, and I'd been looking out for him since he was in middle school. But I was also trying to finish my thesis on trauma-informed care in educational settings while working part-time at the campus counseling center. I thought I could balance it all. Halloween fell on a Tuesday that year. Diego had texted me around 6 in the evening, asking if I wanted to grab dinner before he went to some fraternity party. Alpha Kappa Phi was having their annual Halloween bash, and several of the guys had been pressuring him to rush since the beginning of October. I should have said yes to dinner, should have talked him out of going to the party, but I was buried under research papers and told him to have fun and be safe. Those were the last words I ever spoke to my brother. The call came at 3:47 in the morning from Whitmore General Hospital. A nurse with a tired voice told me there had been an incident, that Diego Mendoza had been brought in unconscious and was in critical condition. I threw on clothes and drove to the hospital in a panic, calling our parents from the parking lot because I couldn't bear to have that conversation while looking at Diego's broken body. He never woke up. Traumatic brain injury, the doctor said. Blood force trauma to the head. He'd been found at the bottom of the stairs in the Alpha Kappa Phi house, supposedly after falling during what they called a Halloween prank gone wrong. He died 4 days later without ever opening his eyes. At first, I believed what everyone told me. Tragic accident. Boys being boys. These things happen at college parties, especially around Halloween when everyone's drinking and acting stupid. The university administration was appropriately somber and supportive. Dean Harrison personally attended the funeral and spoke about Diego's bright future cut short. The Alpha Kappa Phi brothers sent an enormous flower arrangement with a card expressing their deepest condolences. It all felt wrong somehow, but grief has a way of clouding your judgment. Our parents were devastated, barely functional, and I found myself handling all the arrangements, all the paperwork, all the terrible details that come with unexpected death. The university's risk management office was surprisingly helpful, offering to cover the funeral costs and even suggesting a small memorial scholarship in Diego's name. But as the weeks passed and the initial shock began to fade, I started asking questions. How exactly had Diego fallen down the stairs? Why hadn't anyone called for help immediately? What kind of Halloween prank were they talking about? The answers I got were vague and inconsistent. Different fraternity members told different versions of the story, and none of them quite made sense. The first real red flag came when I tried to get a copy of the incident report from campus security. I was told it was part of an ongoing investigation and couldn't be released. When I asked Detective Sarah Kellerman from the local police department, she seemed surprised that I was asking and said the case had been turned over to campus authorities since it happened on university property. "But this is a death investigation," I said during our brief phone conversation. "Doesn't the police department handle those?" There was a pause before she replied. "Ma'am, I understand you're grieving, but according to our records, this was determined to be an accidental death. Campus security investigated thoroughly and found no evidence of foul play." Something about her tone bothered me. It was too careful, too rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. I started digging deeper, reaching out to Diego's friends, his roommate, anyone who might have information about that night. Most of them were sympathetic but claimed they didn't know anything useful. A few seemed genuinely scared to talk to me. Diego's roommate, a kid named Marcus Antonelli, was particularly evasive. He'd been at the party too but claimed he'd left early and didn't see what happened. When I pressed him for details, he got agitated and said he didn't want to get involved in dragging this whole thing out when it wouldn't bring Diego back. "Look, Zara, I like Diego, I really did," Marcus said when I cornered him outside their dorm room one afternoon in late November. "But some things are just accidents, you know. Sometimes bad things happen and there's no one to blame." The way he said it, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me, made my skin crawl. The second red flag was the settlement offer. 6 weeks after Diego's funeral, I received a call from Jennifer Blackstone, a lawyer representing Whitmore College. She wanted to meet to discuss a resolution to what she delicately referred to as the unfortunate situation involving your brother. We met at her downtown office, a glass tower that screamed money and power. Blackstone was probably in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of cold professionalism that made you feel like you were being measured for a coffin. She offered me coffee, expressed her condolences again, and then slid a thick folder across her mahogany desk. "The university would like to offer your family a settlement," she said smoothly. $500,000 to help with funeral expenses, lost future earnings, pain and suffering, that sort of thing. $500,000. It was more money than our family had ever seen at once. Enough to pay off our parents' mortgage, cover my graduate school loans, maybe even help them retire early from those brutal factory jobs. There would be a few conditions, of course, Blackstone continued. Standard confidentiality agreement. You and your family would agree not to discuss the details of Diego's death with anyone, including media outlets, and you would agree not to pursue any further legal action against the university or any of its affiliated organizations. I stared at the folder, my hands shaking slightly. "You want to buy our silence." Blackstone's expression didn't change. "I prefer to think of it as allowing everyone to move forward and heal. Prolonged legal proceedings help no one, and they certainly won't bring Diego back. This offer allows your family to focus on grieving and rebuilding rather than getting trapped in years of litigation. What if I want to know what really happened that night?" Now her expression shifted, just slightly, like a mask slipping for half a second. "Ms. Mendoza, sometimes the truth isn't as comforting as we hope it will be. The investigation found that Diego's death was a tragic accident. Pursuing conspiracy theories or trying to assign blame where none exists will only cause you and your family more pain." The way she said conspiracy theories made something click into place. This wasn't just about covering the university's liability. They were actively trying to prevent me from learning something specific. I took the folder but didn't sign anything. "I need time to think about this." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But I should mention that this offer has an expiration date. We need a decision by January 15th. 2 months. They were giving me 2 months to decide whether to take their money and shut up forever about my brother's death." That night, I called Detective Kellerman again. This time, I was more direct. "Detective, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Was there any pressure from the university or anyone else to close Diego's case quickly?" The long pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Ma'am, I can't discuss the details of an ongoing investigation. I thought you said the case was closed." Another pause. "It is closed. I meant I can't discuss the details of a closed investigation." She was lying, and we both knew it. The question was why. I started spending more time on campus, hanging around the areas where Diego's friends studied, trying to piece together what had happened that night. It was slow going, but gradually, a picture began to emerge that was nothing like the official version. The Halloween party at Alpha Kappa Phi hadn't been just any party. It was part of their informal rush process, a night when potential pledges were supposed to prove their commitment to the fraternity. Several students mentioned seeing Diego being singled out by the older members, particularly by someone named Trevor Morrison, who seemed to be the informal leader of the pledging activities. Trevor Morrison. The name kept coming up in conversations, always accompanied by nervous glances and lowered voices. He was a junior, the son of some wealthy family, and apparently had a reputation for being aggressive during rush activities. When I tried to find him on campus, I was told he'd taken a leave of absence after Diego's death, supposedly due to the trauma of witnessing the accident. I finally tracked down a sophomore named Jessica Cordova who'd been at the party and was willing to talk, though only after I promised not to use her name. We met at a coffee shop off campus, and she kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be watching us. "Look, I only stayed at the party for like an hour, but I saw some of what was happening," she said, stirring her latte nervously. "They were making the potential pledges do these challenges, you know. Stupid stuff at first, like chugging beer or doing embarrassing dances. But then it got weirder." "Weird how?" "They started making them compete against each other. Like physical challenges. I saw them making two guys arm wrestle until one of them got hurt. And there was this thing where they blindfolded pledges and made them walk along this narrow ledge on the second floor while the brothers threw stuff at them." My stomach clenched. "What kind of ledge?" "There's this decorative railing that runs along the wall above the main staircase. It's maybe 6 inches wide, tops. They called it the tightrope walk and said it was a tradition." "Did you see Diego doing this?" Jessica nodded reluctantly. "He was one of the last ones. They've been building it up all night, saying that whoever did the best on the tightrope walk would be guaranteed a bid. Diego really wanted to get into the fraternity, you know. He kept talking about how it would help him make connections, maybe get internships through alumni networks. The image of my brother blindfolded on a 6-inch ledge while drunk college students threw things at him made me feel physically sick." "What happened when he fell?" "I didn't see the actual fall," Jessica said quickly. "But I heard the noise, and then everyone started screaming. Some of the brothers were yelling at people to get out, to not call the cops. Trevor Morrison was going crazy, ordering people around, telling everyone to keep their mouths shut about what they'd seen." "Did anyone call for an ambulance right away?" Jessica looked uncomfortable. "I don't think so. I mean, not right away. There was a lot of chaos, and people were scared. I think they waited maybe 15 or 20 minutes before calling, trying to figure out what to tell the paramedics. 15 or 20 minutes. While Diego lay at the bottom of the stairs with a traumatic brain injury, these kids had spent precious time coordinating their story instead of getting him help. I was furious, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Jessica, do you know if anyone recorded what happened that night? Video, photos, anything?" She shook her head. "I don't think so. I mean, people had their phones out earlier in the evening, but once the challenges started, Trevor made everyone put their phones in a box by the door. Said it was to protect privacy or whatever. A controlled environment. They planned this, made sure there would be no evidence of what really happened. Over the next few weeks, I managed to track down 3 more students who'd been at the party. Their stories were remarkably consistent, considering they'd had months to forget details or convince themselves they'd seen something different. Diego had been participating in increasingly dangerous hazing activities throughout the evening. The tightrope walk was the final challenge, designed to be nearly impossible while intoxicated and blindfolded. Several pledges had refused to do it, but Diego had been determined to prove himself. None of them had seen the actual moment he fell, but they all described the same chaotic aftermath, the same delay in calling for help, the same pressure from fraternity leadership to keep quiet about what had happened. I was building a case, but I knew it wasn't enough. Without physical evidence or witness testimony from someone who'd actually seen Diego fall, it would be my word against the fraternities, and they had the backing of the university administration. I needed something more concrete. That something came from an unexpected source in mid-January, just weeks before the settlement deadline. I got a text from an unknown number asking me to meet at a 24-hour diner near campus. The message was signed a friend of Diego's. I almost didn't go, thinking it might be some kind of setup, but desperation won out. The diner was nearly empty at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, just a few late-night steadiers and insomniacs nursing coffee. I recognized the person waiting for me in a back booth immediately, though we'd never been formally introduced. Cameron Westbrook was a senior at Whitmore, president of the student newspaper, and someone I'd seen around campus but never had reason to talk to. He was tall and gangly, with the kind of intense expression that suggested he took everything very seriously. "You're Diego's sister," he said as I sat down across from him. It wasn't a question. "And you're the one who's been asking questions about what happened on Halloween." I nodded, studying his face. What do you know about my brother? Cameron glanced around the diner, then leaned forward. I know more than I should, and I know that what happened to Diego wasn't an accident. But I also know that proving it is going to be nearly impossible with the resources you have. What do you mean? I mean the Morrison family has been major donors to Whitmore for 3 generations. Trevor Morrison's grandfather has a building named after him. His father sits on the board of trustees. When Trevor got into trouble on Halloween night, the family didn't just hire lawyers, they activated a whole network of influence to make sure this went away quietly. My heart was pounding. What kind of trouble? Cameron pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. It was grainy and taken from a distance, but I could clearly see Diego balanced on what looked like a narrow ledge, wearing a blindfold, while several people stood below him. In the foreground, partially obscured by shadows, was someone who looked like he was preparing to throw something. How did you get this? Anonymous tip. Someone sent it to the newspaper's tip line 3 weeks ago, along with a note saying we should investigate what really happened at the Alpha Kappa Phi Halloween party. I stared at the photo, my vision blurring with tears. There was my baby brother, moments before his death, being treated like entertainment by a group of privileged kids who saw him as expendable. Why are you showing me this? Because the person who sent it wants to do the right thing, but they're scared. And because I've been investigating this for months and I'm hitting walls everywhere I turn. The university won't release any documents. The police claim they have no records beyond the basic incident report, and every time I try to interview someone who was at the party, they either refuse to talk or they've suddenly transferred to other schools. Cameron leaned back, watching my reaction carefully. But I think together, we might be able to get to the truth. I have resources through the newspaper, connections with investigative journalists in the city, and I know how to make noise that's hard to ignore. What I don't have is standing to file lawsuits or make official complaints. You have that. What are you proposing? A partnership. We investigate this together, properly, with everything we can bring to bear. We find out exactly what happened that night, who was responsible, and why it's been covered up. And then we make sure everyone knows about it. I've thought about the settlement offer, about the $500,000 that could transform my family's life. I've thought about my parents, who were still struggling to get through each day, who might never forgive me if they found out I turned down financial security for the sake of what they might see as pointless revenge. But I also thought about Diego, about the promise I'd made to our mother, about the fact that his killers were walking free while my family suffered. What do you need from me? Cameron smiled for the first time since I'd sat down. I need you to file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office alleging that Whitmore College engaged in a criminal conspiracy to cover up your brother's death. And I need you to be prepared for them to fight back with everything they have. The next morning, I called Jennifer Blackstone and told her I was declining the settlement offer. Her response was immediate and telling. Ms. Mendoza, I hope you understand what you're doing. The university has been more than generous in trying to help your family through this difficult time. If you choose to pursue legal action, you should know that we will defend ourselves vigorously, and the discovery process can be quite invasive. Your family's privacy, your brother's reputation, even your own academic and professional prospects could all be subjected to scrutiny. It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Play ball or we'll destroy you. Are you threatening me, Ms. Blackstone? Of course not. I'm simply making sure you understand the potential consequences of prolonged litigation. Sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to accept that tragic accidents happen and focus on moving forward. And sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory is to make sure the people who killed them are held accountable. The line went quiet for several seconds. When Blackstone spoke again, her voice was colder. I hope you don't come to regret this decision, Ms. Mendoza. Cameron and I spent the next 3 weeks building our case. He'd been right about having resources. The student newspaper had connections with professional journalists who were interested in stories about institutional cover-ups, especially when they involved wealthy donor families and student deaths. Within days of filing my complaint with the Attorney General, we had reporters from 2 major newspapers and a local TV station reaching out for interviews. The university's response was swift and predictable. They issued a statement expressing sympathy for my family while defending their handling of the incident. They characterized my allegations as the desperate actions of a grieving sister who was unable to accept that sometimes tragedies occur without anyone being at fault. But Cameron had been busy during those 3 weeks. Through his journalism contacts, he'd managed to track down several students who'd been at the Halloween party but had since transferred to other schools. Away from the pressure and influence of the Whitmore community, they were more willing to talk. The picture that emerged was even more damning than I'd imagined. The hazing at Alpha Kappa Phi wasn't just informal tradition, it was a systematic program of humiliation and physical danger designed to weed out pledges who weren't deemed worthy of membership. The tightrope walk wasn't a spontaneous challenge, it was a regular part of their rush process, and several students had been seriously injured attempting it in previous years. More importantly, Trevor Morrison hadn't just been present when Diego fell, he'd been actively orchestrating the entire event. According to one former student who'd pledged the year before Diego, Trevor had a reputation for singling out scholarship students and minorities for especially dangerous challenges, claiming it was to make sure they were tough enough to represent the fraternity properly. Trevor had this thing about proving that rich kids were tougher than everyone else, the former student told Cameron during a phone interview. He'd always make the scholarship guys do the worst stuff, and he'd make comments about how they needed to earn their place more than legacy pledges did. But the most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source. In early February, Cameron received another anonymous package, this one containing not just photos but a short video clip. The footage was shaky and dark, clearly filmed secretly on someone's phone, but it showed Trevor Morrison standing below the ledge where Diego was balanced, holding what looked like a full beer can. In the video, Trevor could be heard yelling up at Diego, taunting him about being scared, calling him names I won't repeat. Then, just before the clip ended, Trevor drew back his arm and hurled the beer can directly at Diego's head. The video was only 12 seconds long, but it was enough to prove that Diego's fall hadn't been an accident at all. He'd been deliberately struck while blindfolded and trying to balance on a 6-inch ledge, 20 feet above a concrete floor. Cameron and I stared at the video in stunned silence the first time we watched it. Finally, he looked up at me with something like awe in his expression. "This changes everything. This is evidence of assault, maybe even attempted murder. Trevor Morrison didn't just create dangerous conditions, he actively attacked your brother. Who sent this? I don't know, but whoever it is has been sitting on this footage for months. The question is why they're coming forward now." We got our answer 3 days later when Cameron's phone rang at 2 in the morning. The voice on the other end was young, male, and terrified. "Are you the guy investigating the Diego Mendoza thing?" Cameron sat up in bed, immediately alert. "Who is this?" "I can't tell you my name, but I was at the party that night. I took that video you got. Why didn't you come forward sooner?" The caller was quiet for a long moment. "Because Trevor Morrison's family has been threatening me. Not directly, but through channels. My father works for a company that does business with Morrison Industries. After Halloween, my dad got a call from his boss saying that if any information about that night became public, my family could face serious financial consequences. What changed your mind? I saw the news coverage about your investigation. I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting anyone, it was just protecting the people who killed Diego. And I couldn't live with that anymore." The caller, who we later learned was named Patrick Delacroix, provided us with additional details that filled in the gaps in our timeline. He'd been one of the pledges who'd refused to do the tightrope walk, which had made Trevor Morrison furious. Trevor had called him a coward and said that weaklings like him were exactly what was wrong with their generation. When Diego volunteered to attempt the challenge, Trevor had seen it as an opportunity to prove his point about toughness and determination. But as Diego struggled to maintain his balance on the narrow ledge, Trevor had become increasingly agitated, shouting insults and encouragement in equal measure. It was like he wanted Diego to fail, Patrick told us during a secret meeting in a parking garage off campus. But he also wanted to be the reason Diego failed. Like he needed to prove he was in control. "Did anyone try to stop him from throwing the beer can?" Patrick nodded. "A couple of the older brothers told him to calm down, but Trevor was drunk and worked up. He kept saying that if Diego was tough enough to be in the fraternity, he could handle a little pressure." What happened immediately after Diego fell? Chaos. People screaming, Trevor yelling at everyone to shut up and get out. But here's the thing, Trevor wasn't panicked like everyone else. He was angry. He kept saying that Diego had screwed everything up by falling, like it was Diego's fault for not being able to take a hit while blindfolded on a 6-inch ledge. Patrick's account, combined with the video evidence and the testimony from other former students, gave us a clear picture of what had happened on Halloween night. This wasn't a tragic accident or even negligent hazing gone wrong. It was an assault by a privileged young man who saw my brother as expendable and who knew his family's money would protect him from consequences. Armed with this evidence, Cameron and I went to the state attorney general's office and the local district attorney with a formal request for criminal charges against Trevor Morrison and the Alpha Kappa Phi leadership. We also contacted the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, filing a complaint alleging that Whitmore College had violated federal law by covering up a death that occurred during discriminatory hazing practices. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours of our press conference announcing the new evidence, Trevor Morrison was arrested and charged with assault and battery resulting in death. 3 Alpha Kappa Phi officers were charged with hazing and conspiracy to cover up a crime. The university was served with federal subpoenas demanding all records related to the incident and their handling of it. More importantly, our story had gone national. The combination of wealthy privilege, institutional cover-ups, and a young man's death created exactly the kind of narrative that captures public attention. CNN ran a segment on campus hazing culture. The New York Times published an investigation into the Morrison family's donations to Whitmore and their influence over university policies. Social media exploded with #JusticeForDiego hashtags and calls for accountability. The university's carefully constructed wall of silence crumbled almost overnight. Faced with federal investigations, media scrutiny, and the prospect of massive lawsuits, administrators began cooperating with law enforcement. Documents were released showing that university officials had known about dangerous hazing practices at Alpha Kappa Phi for years but had taken no meaningful action because of the fraternity's connections to major donors. Even more damaging was the revelation that Diego wasn't Trevor Morrison's first victim. Records showed that at least 6 other students had been injured during Alpha Kappa Phi hazing activities over the previous 4 years, including one sophomore who'd suffered a concussion during a similar tightrope walk challenge. In each case, the university had quietly settled with the families and buried the incidents. The criminal trial began in September, nearly a year after Diego's death. By then, the case had become a symbol of everything wrong with elite higher education, privilege, and institutional accountability. Cameron had graduated and taken a job with a major newspaper, but he continued covering the story. I had finished my master's degree and was working with a nonprofit organization focused on campus safety reforms. Trevor Morrison's defense team tried every strategy they could think of. They argued that Diego's participation in the hazing activities was voluntary. They claimed that throwing the beer can was a prank, not an assault. They suggested that Diego's death was caused by pre-existing medical conditions that made him unusually vulnerable to head injuries. None of it worked. The video evidence was clear, the witness testimony was consistent, and the pattern of previous incidents established that this wasn't an isolated tragedy but part of a deliberate culture of violence and intimidation. Trevor was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 8 years in prison. The Alpha Kappa Phi officers received sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years. The fraternity was permanently banned from campus, and their national organization revoked the chapter's charter. But the criminal convictions were just the beginning. My family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Trevor Morrison, the Alpha Kappa Phi fraternity, and Whitmore College. The case never went to trial. The defendants agreed to settle for $12 million, the largest such settlement in the university's history. More importantly, the settlement included provisions that went far beyond monetary compensation. Whitmore was required to implement comprehensive anti-hazing policies, including mandatory training for all students and faculty, random inspections of fraternity and sorority activities, and the creation of an anonymous reporting system for dangerous behavior. The university also established the Diego Mendoza Memorial Fund for campus safety, with an initial endowment of $5 million to support anti-hazing programs at colleges across the country. The Morrison family's influence at Whitmore came to an abrupt end. Trevor's father was quietly asked to resign from the board of trustees, and the university announced that it would no longer accept donations from Morrison Industries. The building that had borne the family name for 50 years was renamed the Center for Student Safety and Equity. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was what happened to the people who had tried to cover up Diego's death. Dean Harrison was forced to resign after emails surfaced showing that he'd personally intervened to prevent campus security from conducting a thorough investigation of the incident. Jennifer Blackstone's law firm lost several major clients when their role in the cover-up became public, and she eventually left the legal profession entirely. As for me, the experience changed the entire trajectory of my life. I finished my master's degree and went on to law school, specializing in civil rights and institutional accountability. I now work for a public interest law firm that represents families in cases involving campus violence and administrative cover-ups. We've handled more than 30 cases in the 5 years since Diego's death, and we've recovered tens of millions of dollars for victims while forcing universities to implement real safety reforms. My parents were initially angry about my decision to turn down the original settlement offer, especially when the legal battle stretched on for months with no guarantee of success. But when they saw Trevor Morrison led away in handcuffs, when they heard the judge sentence him to 8 years in prison, when they watched the university president publicly apologize for the institution's failures, they understood why I'd made the choice I did. Mijo would be proud of you, my mother told me after the criminal trial ended. You kept your promise to watch over him, even after he was gone. The one thing I regret is that Diego never got to see justice served. He never got to finish his degree, never got to prove that a kid from a working-class family could succeed at an elite institution like Whitmore. But in a way, his death accomplished something that his life might never have been able to do. It exposed a system of privilege and corruption that had operated in darkness for decades, and it created changes that will protect other young people from facing the same fate. Today, there's a memorial bench on the Whitmore campus with Diego's name on it, placed right outside the building that used to bear the Morrison family name. Students stop there to study, to eat lunch, to take a moment of quiet reflection. It's become an unofficial gathering place for campus safety advocates and a reminder that some things are more important than money or influence or institutional reputation. The bench has a simple inscription, Diego Mendoza, beloved brother and son. His life mattered. His death will not be forgotten. His legacy is the safety of all students who come after. Sometimes I sit there when I'm visiting campus for speaking engagements or meetings with administrators about safety policies. I think about what Diego would say if he could see how his story changed things, how his death became a catalyst for protecting other students. I think he'd be proud, and maybe a little amazed that his big sister managed to take on a whole university and win. The truth is, I didn't set out to become an activist or a crusader for justice. I just wanted to know what really happened to my little brother, and I couldn't accept the lies and cover-ups that were supposed to make his death easier to bear. But sometimes refusing to accept the easy answer, refusing to take the money and stay quiet, refusing to let powerful people escape accountability for their actions, sometimes that's exactly what the world needs. Diego's story didn't end on Halloween night in 2023. It continued through months of investigation, through criminal trials and civil lawsuits, through policy changes and memorial funds and new laws designed to prevent similar tragedies. It continues today every time a university administrator thinks twice before covering up dangerous behavior, every time a student reports hazing instead of staying silent, every time a family refuses to accept that their child's death was just an accident that no one could have prevented. That's the real victory, not the criminal convictions or the monetary settlement or the public apologies, but the knowledge that Diego's death meant something, that it created changes that will outlast all of us. And that's a legacy worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people standing in your way might be. Justice isn't always quick, and it isn't always complete, but sometimes, if you're willing to fight for it long enough and hard enough, it does come. Diego taught me that, even after he was gone.